You are listening to the Tricorder Transmissions, episode 87. And now, here are Craig and Jeff.
Welcome back to the Tricorder Transmission. This is episode number 87. We're going to be talking about Gold Key Comics number 7, The Voodoo Planet. We are your hosts, Jeff Hewlett and the snickering Craig Cohen.
Yes.
The Voodoo Planet got you laughing already, huh?
Yeah, I think this one might have been a little too much for me.
Really? All right, interesting. So, well, this is the first Gold Key comic of the 1970s. Kind of cool. We've progressed into the next decade of Star Trek, still with writer Dick Wood. The artist is still Alberto Gigliotti, so he's still in the swing of things. And it was March 1970, 32 pages. Star date 24/17.9. See, there's a little teaser on the first page that reads, "In all the explorations of space, the Starship Enterprise had never encountered such an incredible sight. It staggered the minds of even the most seasoned voyagers, for they had rocketed into the most terrifying world of the universe on the Voodoo Planet." And there is a depiction of the Eiffel Tower being toppled over on top of Kirk and Spock. And Spock says, "As you Earthlings say, let's move it."
Yes.
Yeah, so you seem to think this is a chuckle-worthy comic, Craig. Anything to say before we start talking about it?
I think this is really one of those cases where the comic book does something that the show, I don't think, ever would have done.
I think I know what you're alluding to, but I'll wait until we actually get to that part before we jump into what I think you're talking about. So, well, as we always do, we're going to give you listeners a little bit of a warning before we start talking about the actual comic, in case you don't want spoilers if you haven't read this yet. So we're going to start talking about the issue in 3, 2, 1. All right. So the Enterprise is passing near a planet, as it's known to do in previous episodes of this comic book. Captain Kirk notices something familiar and disturbing and asks Mr. Sulu to magnify the image of the planet. As the picture clears, some space dust in the way, they look carefully at it and they seem to see something that's not possible, although we know this is quite possible, as we've watched the show before. Due to there being several light years away, it is another Earth clone planet, surprisingly enough. Spock suggested they may have passed through some sort of a space warp. So let's see, we have they're passing through the atmosphere of the planet, take a closer look, as they do in most of these, ending up over Paris, France. Kirk and Spock choose to beam down, leaving Dr. McCoy, of all people, in charge of the ship. Not Scotty, not Sulu, but Dr. McCoy. They end up near the Eiffel Tower, and there's not a person or a vehicle or anything moving. It's all static. There's nothing going on at all. So they speculate as to what might have happened, suggesting some sort of a proton bomb war or some sort of a cataclysm, but Spock quickly dashes that and says there would be some skeletons and wreckage about, and it wouldn't be as pristine as it is. And just then Spock notices that the Eiffel Tower is quite a bit shorter than its actual height, and that it's also made of paper mache. I think we can stop here, since I heard you had something that you were going to say.
Well, yeah, I took note of the fact that maybe this was for the purposes of illustrating to the reader, but the captain's log is actually a physical book.
Yeah, I was going to mention that too. It's funny that you said that. It's kind of floating there in space.
Yeah.
And it reads, "This day, in our exploration of deep space, something of significance was detected."
Now, like I said, I don't know if that was just a device that they used to illustrate it, or if that is truly how Kirk is keeping his logs.
It seems almost diary-like, though.
Yeah.
The way that sentence is written, it doesn't seem like something a captain's log would say. Usually the captain's logs that we hear on the show are a little more specific.
Right.
It wouldn't have some sort of a dramatic lead up to what actually happened. So I'm sure Starfleet wouldn't be interested in Kirk's interpretation or how he felt about what was going on. But so big thing in this comic though is Sulu is here. Not only is he name dropped, he actually gets a speaking part.
Yeah.
For quite a bit of the comic. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean this comic, this issue starts off extremely, extremely promising in my opinion.
I guess you're saying that it gets a little bit more disappointing, but I love the fact that Sulu's here and he has so much to do in this comic. So we saw a glimpse of a character that we thought looked like Sulu in a previous issue, but all up till now, all we've had is Kirk, Spock, Scotty, and a little bit of McCoy thrown in. Scotty strangely doesn't appear in this comic.
No, that's very weird.
Yeah, and the terminology in this issue is actually starting to converge more with the show. They actually talk about Kirk wants to see the planet on the viewer as opposed to the TV spectroscope or whatever they were calling it prior to this. That's kind of cool.
Oh yeah.
But they do take a step back here though, and if you notice that they're not on the bridge. In the last issue, they were on something that looked just like the bridge. Now, in this opening sequence, it's Sulu sitting in front of some kind of a giant screen, and they look to be back in one of those mechanical rooms again. Yeah. That they've been in. So, I guess the bridge is going to wait to come back another day. And, the transporter room is actually called the transporter room in this issue, as opposed to some of the other teleportation chamber and whatever else they've been calling it. So it's nice to see it called the transporter room. Yeah. Yeah. A couple of weird language choices, I think, happened in this opening sequence as well. And there's a Kirk line here that really, really struck me as odd. I don't know if you picked up on this, but this is Kirk talking about going down on the to see what happened on the planet. And he says, well, whatever in the blue blazes has happened, let's pour on the coals and take a first-hand look-see.
Yes. Oh, my God.
Like, wow, what a cobbled together line that is of just weirdness and bizarreness. But it doesn't surprise me too much because we've heard little bits of weirdness in prior issues. But this one seems like a long string of bizarreness kind of tacked together into one sentence. What else? Spock, when he's talking about the paper mache Eiffel Tower, he remarks, shades of Vulcan. Yes. This girder, it's made of paper mache. So shades of Vulcan. It's nice that they're mentioning Vulcan now, though. They're making it known in the comic that Spock is definitely an alien, and he is from Vulcan. So we're at least kind of getting closer and closer to the show as we get further into these.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, and one thing that really kind of made me raise an eyebrow is that when they're talking about how there's nobody around, Kirk says there isn't a car, bus, truck, or bike around. Interesting that all of those things still exist in Star Trek time. Yeah. Cars, buses, trucks, and bikes.
The other funny thing is, at this point, they should be pretty used to abandoned planets.
Yeah, really. Even in the comic book, there's a lot of weird abandoned planets.
It seems like every time they go to a planet in the comic book, it's abandoned. Or at least initially abandoned.
Yeah, there's somebody underground or living in a tower somewhere. But yeah, once again, it's an abandoned planet. It appears to be nobody around. And it's an Earth-like replica, but all the buildings are made of paper mache, of all things. So I haven't actually heard the term paper mache in years.
Yeah, that's actually some really detailed work.
Yeah, really. If you look at the artwork in this comic, is actually really good. When they're drawing all these historical landmarks, they all look really, really nice.
Oh, they're spot on.
Yeah, excellent. So, ready to move on to the next part?
Yeah, let's go.
All right. So, of course, as in many of the prior issues of this comic book, somehow, out of nowhere, a laser beam hits near them, so they're under attack, and the laser hits the Eiffel Tower, and it begins to collapse. Kirk and Spock run off. Even though the structure is made of paper, it's still pretty large. Yeah, and Kirk kind of likens it to being, having bricks dropped on him. So they're running away, and they escape, of course, and the tower crashes to the ground and onto some other nearby buildings, and they all get crushed. And, of course, a voice comes over a an ethereal speaker. It's a disembodied voice, and welcomes them to his private world and tells them that all of their questions will be answered if they survive. So a condition red radio message comes down from the Enterprise, and the two beam back to the ship, and it was Sulu. Tells them that at the same time as the Eiffel Tower was destroyed on the papier-mâché planet, it was also destroyed on Earth. A little bit strange.
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to figure out exactly what was going on, and McCoy and Spock are speculating about what might be at hand here. And McCoy surmises that maybe some sort of weird deep space voodoo, quote unquote. The laser acting as a pinpoint that they'll need to trace back to find the source so they can try to figure out who exactly is destroying all these buildings on Earth. As they fly through the atmosphere, they spot the laser beam striking the Colosseum of Rome and destroying it. So once again, the same thing happens on Earth. The Colosseum in Rome is destroyed. Fortunately, they're able to track down the laser. They got a fix on it, and they head in that direction. So they arrive at a big giant cloud of space trash floating near a planet, and they head towards the center to try to figure out where this is coming from, and using the space garbage to obscure the ship while they search around. Good, another stopping point here, Craig. Interesting concept, though, that whatever happens on the Voodoo Planet also happens on Earth. So we witnessed that the destruction of the Eiffel Tower and the Colosseum of Rome, both of which wind up being inexplicably destroyed on Earth. There's no laser beam on Earth. They just kind of fall apart.
And this is a setup that really, really grabs you as a reader. And I think this is one of those ones where the setup is much, much stronger than the payoff.
I might be inclined to agree with that when we get there, but it made me start to think about, is destruction the only thing that's copied? So if they were to actually build something or move something on the mock Earth, would it also move or be created on the real Earth?
Well, it's interesting because later on you have little dolls of Kirk and Spock. So do those things not need to be on the planet, or do they originally need to be from Earth? But in Spock's case, you have a Vulcan. So it seems like it's not exclusive to Earth even. And then how do you establish where it is?
That's another good thought. Yeah, I would love to explore that a little bit deeper. And I guess without ruining the rest of the comic book, I guess we really can't speculate too much because we kind of do know why this stuff is happening. But so weird deep space voodoo.
Yeah, it seems weird that McCoy would be the one to speculate about that.
And wow, I don't think I've ever heard the word voodoo mentioned in any Trek episode of any series I've ever watched.
No.
I wonder what the author was thinking. I mean, I guess, was voodoo a big thing back in the 60s and 70s?
Oh, yeah, totally. If you think about around that time, you had the James Bond movie, Live and Let Die, which had a voodoo theme.
True, that's right. Thanks for pointing that out. I forgot about that. You know, on page 11, the ship is going through that cloud of space debris. And as soon as I saw those panels, it made me think about the 2009 Star Trek movie, where the Enterprise gets delayed in confronting the Narada, the Romulan ship, and they get there a couple minutes after, and the whole fleet is destroyed, and they're flying through the space garbage.
Right.
God, it looked just like that to me, those panels.
Yeah, no, that's a great observation.
Yeah, maybe I should try to get a screen grab of those and post them up. People can take a look at them, because I couldn't believe how similar it looked to me. And also on page 11, the first panel, I think this may be the first panel in one of these Trek comics to feature this many characters, identified characters, in one spot. So you got Kirk, Spock, McCoy, and Sulu in one panel.
Another great observation.
Yeah, I think we've only gotten a max of 3 before, where you had, either Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, or Kirk, Spock, and Scotty in one frame. So we're kind of building up the crew. I'm hoping that in another issue or two, maybe we'll get everybody.
Yeah, well, we can hope so.
All right, so let's see. Moving on. Spock, Kirk, and McCoy beam down to the planet that they find amongst the debris to see some aliens that look like people throwing spears into some sort of a human cutouts, like these giant paper humans. And they disable the aliens and head towards a nearby structure. It kind of looks like a space observation telescope. They enter to find a closed chamber with a staircase that heads upwards. Kirk overhears a voice stating that the Sphinx in Egypt will be destroyed next. They rush into the room, but it's too late. The Sphinx is destroyed. The figure who is manning the giant laser beam is cowled in a robe and stops and calls his guards in, who happen to be holding those dolls of Kirk and Spock that Craig just mentioned before. And they start jabbing voodoo needles into those dolls, causing Kirk and Spock to feel pain. So the figure removes his cowl, and he's immediately recognized as a guy named Count Dressler, a mad ruler of some sort of a kingdom on Earth. I guess I don't know how long ago it was. It doesn't really say. Spock and Kirk's weapons are taken away from him, and they're placed in a prisoner cage. Kirk asks Dressler how he arrived on the planet when most of Earth had been hunting him down, and he tells him that he triggered his emergency rocket to escape after he'd been, all of his options were exhausted and he was being kind of hunted down by the authorities on Earth. So he kind of happened upon this planet where he found these primitive people and he took their occult secrets and became their leader. So at that point, he goes into some sort of a trance and starts to recite some words, and the Leaning Tower of Pisa comes up on a monitor. Dressler drinks a bunch of liquid and fires his laser, and the Tower of Pisa crashes to the ground. And Dressler tells him that they will stay his hostages, and he will inform Earth that he will destroy everything on the planet unless they allow him to return as a free man. So we've got a mad former ruler from Earth. They don't really say where he was from on Earth, though.
No.
And very interesting that Kirk is the one that recognizes him as Count Dressler.
Yeah, and this is another one of those cases, I think, kind of like one of the previous issues where they go into the comic book history. In the previous issue, it was a little jarring where Spock comes up with the element that they use to separate the two planets that are colliding. And here, I think it worked a lot better in terms of introducing a character or an event from the comic book's past that a character knows about. Here, it didn't feel quite as shocking or quite as out of the blue. I also like how they indicate that they're whispering.
Oh God, yeah. Some of these mechanics they use in the comic book are a little bit odd.
Mm-hmm. Also, did we skip past the military men ad?
No, we're getting there though.
Oh,
we're
okay.
getting there. It was part of this. I have a note to talk about that Craig is referring to an advertisement that was right in the middle of the comic book that says, "Oh, that was military men. Your credit is good." And it's some kind of a jewelry ad. I guess it's like engagement rings and wedding rings for guys in the military. And I guess you buy the ring by mail order, and you would get billed at a certain frequency. You could pay $10 twice a month or $20 once a month.
Yeah. I printed it out, and hopefully I'll be getting my ring in a couple weeks.
Yeah, and the prices are right.
Oh, yeah.
I tell you, those prices are cheap. And if anybody's interested in this, it's Military Diamond Sales, P.O. Box 23635, Pleasant Hill, California. You write to them and see if you can still get $249 diamond engagement rings. So back in 1970, the price of engagement rings was much cheaper than it is today. So, Count Dressler, I think it looks like he's wearing a monocle in this early part of the comic. I don't think he's wearing it later, but maybe I'm mistaken.
I'm looking at that. Yeah, I totally see what you're talking about.
Yeah. So Dressler, when he was on Earth, this is the kind of the backstory to Dressler and why he is on this other planet now. He was making or attempting to make hydrogen bombs when the rest of the countries in the world were banning them. And he fled Earth and just happened to find the Voodoo Planet by chance. I like the fact that they're referring to making, heavy weaponry and a guy trying to take over the world by taking advantage of a situation or peacetime that they were working on Earth, where everybody was starting to align and become peaceful. And we know Earth is completely peaceful in the Star Trek era. So it's cool to hear. It's almost sounded kind of Khan-like to me.
Now, here is where I want to ask you a question, Jeff.
Oh, okay.
Do you think that Kirk and Spock beaming down to the planet and witnessing the destruction of the Eiffel Tower was coincidental, or was just Dressler executing a plan when he saw that there were representatives from Starfleet there?
Oh, wow, that's a good question. Oh, I would love to think that he did it for their benefit, and he was just waiting for the day that a Starfleet ship just happened to show up.
Yeah.
And they beamed down. But, that's a really tough one, because it doesn't make sense that he would just kind of hang out there and wait.
Yeah, and then also try and kill them.
Yeah. Well, maybe he assumed that there were people still on the ship who would relay the messages back, but it just doesn't seem likely. It's very coincidental.
Yeah, but the thing that doesn't work for me in terms of it being coincidental is he shows a desire later in the issue to go home, to go back to Earth.
True.
So creating a random destructive event seems really counterintuitive.
It does. And wow. One has to wonder how long it took to create that duplication of Earth out of paper mache.
Oh, yeah.
It seems a very elaborate plan in order to get back to Earth, right?
Oh, yeah, totally. I mean, it's one of those cases where you see it a lot in movies where you have a villain who is so smart or, genius level. And you think, wow, if they use their smarts in a different manner, they could get much, much better results than what they're attempting.
That's an excellent point. It seems like there's an awful lot of effort being put in here on the part of Dressler and his lackeys in order to execute a plan that, it relied too much on random chance to get him back home. I mean, what would have happened if they built all this stuff and this elaborate laser beam and this elaborate plot and no Starfleet ship ever showed up there?
Yeah.
And he just kind of hanging there twiddling his thumbs for years until he croaked. You're like, well, guess I'm not going home.
Exactly.
Guess I'm just going to hang out here forever. But, and if no Starfleet ship ever showed up and he just started blowing stuff up, no one on Earth would ever know it was him.
Yeah, nobody would ever be able to make the connection. It's a question I would love to ask Dressler.
Yeah, or Dick Wood, the writer.
Yes.
Yeah. So phasers terminology, they're calling them phasers now, so they have their pistols. But strangely enough, the phasers in this comic look like the Cage era phasers. As opposed to the normal phasers we know. And I know we've seen phasers in prior issues that look closer to the normal phasers. What else here? Oh, I like that Kirk calls the people on the planet voodooites.
Yes.
So not only are they using voodoo to enact this destruction, but they're also named voodoo. The planet is named voodoo. Very convenient.
Yes. Yeah, that's a very Star Trek.
And Kirk also says the word pay dirt. I love the word pay dirt.
Do we have we also gotten to the point where they beam back to the ship?
I think they beamed back and beamed back down again, and then they're going to beam back again shortly.
Yeah, I found it interesting that the transporter locks in on the radio, as they call it, which is basically the tricorder.
Oh, yeah, good point. Good observation.
And they're beaming back based on that. Spock and I guess, I'm not sure, I don't think it's McCoy, have to be in proximity to Kirk in order to beam back with him.
Yes, that's coming right up here in the next part. So they, Kirk and Spock have been locked in a cage, and while Dressler is busy getting all voodooed up, McCoy sneaks back into the room because he was left outside, and he uses his phaser to free Kirk and Spock from the cage that they're stuck in. The three of the guys attack the Voodooites and grab their gear and beam back to the Enterprise. And they're safe for the moment, so they brainstorm some ideas. And it's quickly, the idea of destroying the planet itself is quickly dismissed because the Voodooite people have just been duped and are being used as pawns by Dressler. And we know that the Prime Directive does not allow them to just wantonly destroy civilization, so they need to come up with another idea. Suddenly, they're distracted again by pains in their arms and legs, so their dolls down on the planet are getting stabbed by the voodoo needle. So McCoy is able to inject them with some painkillers, which dulls the pain enough that they can get back to work. And Spock begins to study an ancient occult book. And he discovers a Vulcan clan. Now, why he wouldn't have known about this, because he's an expert in Vulcan history. But Spock discovers in this book there was a Vulcan clan known as the Paincasters. They would throw themselves into trances, drink potions, and when they were able to inflict pain from long distances away. Spock suggests that they may be able to do that themselves if they can duplicate the potion with some synthetic ingredients, because all the ingredients that the potion needs are actually things that are grown on Vulcan. So Spock's going to give it a shot in the lab, but he says it may not work. He can't promise anything. After working in the lab for some time, the potion is complete. Spock is the first one to give it a shot. He says the magic words, drinks the liquid, and suddenly he is pain-free. Kirk follows suit, and he is also pain-free. So we're getting kind of close to the end of the comic, so I'm going to stop really quick again and point out a couple things. I'm sure you have some things to say too, Craig. And I love the fact that Dr. McCoy melts the cage bars with his phaser.
Yeah.
That's a cool effect. I wish they would have done that on the show at some point, where you'd see melting bars. Usually stuff just disappeared when you shot it with a phaser.
Right.
Yeah. And I think this is the part that you were talking about before. I have it written down here where they all run over to a corner of the room to beam back up to the ship. And Spock is kind of diving towards McCoy and Kirk to jump into the transporter beam. I thought it was a really cool shot there. I like the way they drew that.
Yeah. Totally. But again, it kind of illustrates a difference between how the transporter technology works in the comics versus the show.
Yeah, it seems like you have to be in a certain proximity, and they don't beam you directly up. They kind of beam an area up.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, because I think there was an earlier part of the comic where they were talking about how they had to get clear of the Voodooites to make sure none of them got beamed up to the ship as well, because they were going to kind of be too close to them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's been said a couple times in prior issues.
Yeah.
One thing that really kind of put me off of this is the fact that there were voodoo practicing Vulcans.
Oh, totally. I mean, you'd have to go way, way, way back in Vulcan history for this to really make any sense to me. But at the same time, I have to sort of give I guess Dick Wood and the Gold Key Comics credit for not being afraid to create their own mythology within that world.
That's excellent, and that's one of the things I think makes these comics so worth reading. It's almost like Star Trek from somebody else's perspective. It's the same kind of characters, but they're taking their own liberties with the backstories and some of the mythology, and it makes it really interesting. Even though maybe this stuff isn't never going to be considered canon, but I like the fact that they're adding things into their own Star Trek canon, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes a lot of these things really worth reading, even though some of the dialogue is campy and the stories are a little bit crazy at times. I really enjoy that too. I'm glad that you said that.
Mm.
So let's see. So getting close to the end here, Kirk and Spock beam back into Dressler's lab. Dressler discovers that his powers are now useless because Spock and Kirk also have the power of voodoo. It's almost like Luke Skywalker getting stronger with the Force, right?
Mm-hmm.
And also Vader has a better match. So now Dressler's on the run, and Spock pulls out a doll of Dressler. Where they got that from, I don't know. I guess they made it on the ship. But unfortunately, Dressler is also immune, as Kirk and Spock now are, so they can't slow him down. Dressler runs out of the lab. Kirk and Spock are chasing after him. Suddenly, I guess Dressler's potion wears off, and the pain of the doll getting stabbed starts to get to him. Kirk and Spock are able to chase him down, reach him, and beam him back up to the ship. And they take him back to the Earth duplicate planet and leave him there as a form of solitary confinement. And the comic abruptly ends there.
Yeah, it's another one where I thought maybe a page was missing.
Yeah, I mean, there's absolutely nothing. There's no epilogue whatsoever. It's just we're leaving him on the planet. He's stranded forever. Done.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. A couple of things I have here is the fact that Kirk and Spock use voodoo to counter voodoo, not realizing that if they're not feeling pain, he won't feel pain as well. And also the idea that Spock would be taking pleasure in inflicting pain on Dressler.
That was very off-putting, and that's I think it's another product of this writer taking the liberties and not and kind of defining his own characters in a way. So, we do see some similarities with Kirk and Spock to the show, but there are big tangents that they both seem to go off on that don't necessarily fit the characters we know. And this is another one of those times where I'm anxious to see when the next writer comes in, what the characters are like, if they're going to be more like they are in the show or if they're going to take their own spin on them.
Mm-hmm. Another huge question that's raised at the end of this issue for me is what happens to the voodooites?
Yeah, those poor people.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to be completely lost. They'll have no guidance. They'll have no leader, and no real ability to practice what they've been sort of doing for seemingly years.
Yeah, well, maybe it's going to be like the Apple, where they kill their leader. Kirk and Spock kill their leader or their provider, and then go back and kind of teach them, hey, here's how you farm, and here's how you fall in love, and here's how you build houses on your own. I would like to think they wouldn't leave them abandoned like that, but the comic, again, there's no epilogue.
No.
So we don't really know.
Yeah.
But, the funny thing, you were talking about how you were kind of disappointed at the end of this, and I kind of felt like this issue was more like a TOS episode to me than many of the previous ones were. I could almost see some of this stuff happening on the show. It almost felt like the show at times.
Yeah, no, I can agree with you there. I just think this is another one of those cases where if the script had been worked a little bit more, they definitely could have turned this into probably a stellar episode of the series. I think in working that script, they would have maybe found a more plausible way to create a connection between the planets. Again, I talked about the mythology they created here. And that mythology definitely works in the comics, but I can't see this, this Vulcan voodoo really flying in the original series TV show universe.
No, I agree with that completely. And if I heard Spock read that book and talk about that on the show, I probably would have laughed.
Yeah.
It just seems very, very far-fetched. I mean, we know that the Vulcans had a very barbaric past and that they became logical and more peaceful. But I don't know, magic and the occult, it seems to go in a direction that I just never thought about Vulcan having gone in.
Yeah, and again, for me, this is one of those stories, and there's tons of stories like this in the world where the setup just the setup's much better than the payoff.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, yeah, the payoff was a little bit weak, and I really wish they had some kind of an epilogue to this. It feels like they took a little while to get where they were going, and once the story got moving, it was interesting, and then I think they just ran out of space.
Yep.
In the comic book yet again, because it's a relatively short comic. So, anything else you want to add in before we wrap up?
No, I guess we could talk about our essential vote.
Sure. I'm going to go out on a limb and give this a non-canon essential vote simply for the first appearance and dialogue from Mr. Sulu in the comic book.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to agree and expound on it a little bit in terms of we got some characters here, but then also really the introduction or the presentation of some Vulcan history that deviates from the show.
Yeah, no, I absolutely, it's great. I love it. That's perfect. So we got another double essential non-canon comic book here, and that's really great. So that's 2 in a row. And I guess we will be back next Sunday with another Gold Key comic, number 8. And until then, keep your eyes on the feed. I think we've got some special stuff coming up this week. We've got the Red Shirt Diaries folks coming back to the show to talk about season 2. That should be out very shortly. And we will see you guys next Sunday. So stop by our Facebook page, the Tricorder Transmissions, or Twitter, TTT_pod, or check out our website, tricordertransmissions.com. And I think Craig and I are both on Twitter as ourselves. I am J_Benj, B-E-N-J, J_BENJ. And Craig, where are you?
Mr. Craig Cohen, and that is an MR for Mr.
Excellent. So we will see you all next week. Thanks for tuning in.